Those candidates who's already out on the campaign trail, Republican Adam Putnam. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
So you're the current agriculture commissioner, also a former congressman and state legislator. We're going to get to Adam Putnam, this is your life, in just a moment. But first I want to get to a poll that came out recently, and it shows you with the lead over someone who folks recognize name-wise, Ron DeSantis. 27% for you, 23% for him. How does that make you feel?
Well, it's always good to be a front runner, but it's like being number one in the preseason. It feels good, but it doesn't mean a thing. It only matters how you end. Just ask some of our local football teams about how things ended versus where they were in the preseason. Where you end is more important than where you start, but I'm thrilled with the grassroots support that we've got. We had 2,000 people at my kickoff announcement in my hometown of Bartow, not too far from here, and we continue to just build out that grassroots momentum, which I think is most important to our success.
This poll pointed out something that's very worrisome, or should be worrisome to a lot of candidates, the undecided voters.
Sure.
A lot of the folks who took part in this poll were undecided. So how do you convince somebody watching you right now with a 30-second elevator pitch why they should vote for you?
Well, I'm the candidate who knows Florida best and will put Florida first. My number one passion as governor will be to put vocational and technical education back into our middle schools and high schools and stop treating our community colleges, our state colleges, like a redheaded stepchild. That's how we're going to rebuild the middle class. That's how we're going to raise wages. That's how we're going to have a stronger, more resilient economy here in the Sunshine State.
Wow, I have to tell you, no one who sat in this chair has ever talked that passionately about vocational school. We're going to revisit that in a moment. So let's get back to your life. For those who have just moved into the area and going, who is Adam Putnam? Well, here we go. Commissioner of Agriculture since 2011. Before that, a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from 2001 to 2011, and before that, a member of the Florida House from 96 to 2000. And speaking of that office, when you were elected in 96, you were 22 years old. My goodness, the youngest person elected to the Florida House, a record that stood, by the way, until 2016 with the election of Representative Amber Mariano at 21 years old. And then Representative Jennifer Sullivan came close in 2014 when she was elected at just 23. So let's go ahead and call you a young go-getter. The governor's mansion. Why you? Why now?
Well, as I've said, no one knows Florida better than I do. As a fifth-generation Floridian, I'm passionate about making sure that we focus on the long-term challenges facing Florida, not just slapping a Band-Aid on the problem. That begins with creating better jobs and attracting a more diverse array of jobs to Florida so that our young people don't have to leave the state when they graduate. It means investing in our community colleges and our state colleges as well as our universities. It means that we have to continue to be supportive of our law enforcement and our veterans, because public safety is the key to all of the other economic opportunities that we have. And my passion as a farmer and a small businessman has always been making sure that we protect the things that make Florida Florida, most especially our water resources. It's the key to growth, it's the key to the environment, it's the key to agriculture.
Let me ask you if you talk about the earth and water and the environment. Oil exploration and drilling off the coast of Florida, are you for or against?
Against. Our beaches and water are our golden goose for our state, and we don't need to have offshore drilling in Florida.
Some reports say President Trump is saying, you know what, it should be okay. And there's been some pushback by Governor Rick Scott.
Governor Scott's done an extraordinary job of pushing back, which is in keeping with a long line of Florida governors who have focused on protecting our shorelines. And I think he's made progress with the administration, and I don't believe that they will move forward with a plan to drill off of Florida's waters.
Let's talk about education funding. You talk about really praising and bringing to the forefront the need of having folks pursue certain types of education that
Sure.
doesn't necessarily mean a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree.
Well, I'm a product of Florida's public schools. My 4 children are in Florida's public schools. My wife taught kindergarten before before we began our own family. And as someone who comes from a small business background, I know how hard it is to find talented folks to come work. And the number one job vacancy in Florida is nursing. The number 3 or number 4 job vacancy in Florida are truck drivers and heavy equipment operators. We need both. I mean, you think about when you need a plumber, you need a plumber, and they're making more per hour than a lot of lawyers are.
Absolutely.
When our power went out during the hurricanes, those linemen, they made good money. So we have to make sure that we're preparing our students for all the options that they may have. Many of those options pay better than a 4-year university degree.
Talk to me about charter schools. Sometimes people think, ew, charter schools. There's been so many cases across the state of Florida where funds have been mismanaged, that they don't have to adhere to some of the same criteria as mainstream public schools. Do you support charter schools? Do you think there's enough oversight?
Well, I do support charter schools. I think that school choice is an important option. I'm a product of our traditional public schools, and my children are in those now. But for families who need the right customized learning for their child, charter schools fill the role. Homeschooling in some cases fills that role for parents who choose that option. But it doesn't mean that they should be exempt from oversight. It's still public money going into a public education system, and they should be held accountable for how those dollars are spent and the learning gains that those children make in a year's time.
Space Coast, that's a big deal here in Central Florida, and now we've got a resurgence now that the shuttle has been retired years ago, and we're looking at the Falcon Heavy and other rockets. Talk to me about what investments you think should be made in Central Florida, but specifically on the Space Coast, to address that part of our society.
So the Space Coast fits the bill for my point that we have jobs going unfilled in Florida because of a talent gap. We need rocket scientists, engineers who have university degrees and advanced degrees, but also as Florida's space industry has expanded into manufacturing, we're doing more than just the launch. We need more skilled labor in these types of facilities, in Grumman, in Harris, in all of the companies that have been attracted to our natural advantage in space. So it's an opportunity for us to invest in our universities and our state colleges, and we ought to be prepared to roll up our sleeves and compete for more of those jobs. Economic development is key, and we ought to be willing to sell Florida through Visit Florida and invest in new jobs through Enterprise Florida.
Big players like SpaceX and others come to mind when I ask you this. The current approach of private businesses getting into the space game, is that the right idea, do you think?
It's absolutely the right idea. They have taken Florida jobs further, faster than the shuttle program did.
And many people didn't think it would be possible.
Just 8 years ago, everybody was so depressed that we had lost the shuttle program. We were hitchhiking to space with the Russians. That has changed. And the private sector, the commercialization of space, represents a whole new opportunity for Florida Space Coast communities. And it's moving. They're constructing buildings and assembling satellites in the time that NASA would still be arguing over procurement language and trying to get Congress to fund them.
Yeah, the government red tape. Let's talk about something that I've seen lots of published reports on when I was getting ready for this interview. Your tweets, your social media.
Yeah.
You had said we all know you're an NRA supporter, and you put out a tweet a few months ago saying, "Proud NRA sellout." What does that mean?
Well, it was a play on words because of a columnist who did not share my pro Second Amendment views. Look, I grew up in agriculture. I grew up on the ranch, had a rifle under the seat. My children all are shooters. My son got I got him a shotgun for his baptism present. I mean, it is a part of my life, my heritage, and I am proud of the fact that as Commissioner of Agriculture, I have taken Florida to be #1 in the number of law-abiding citizens exercising their Second Amendment rights.
Curveball question of the day. You ready? We've only had them since 1968 in Florida. I think you get this one. At least talking about the modern era. We're talking about lieutenant governor. Do you think in Florida we need a lieutenant governor position?
You do need a lieutenant governor. It's an important role, and they need to be empowered to have real responsibilities. And so I think that when you're talking about leading a state that's now the third largest state, you don't want any ambiguity about succession plans. You want to make sure that that lieutenant governor is a partner in leading the state and is ready to step up and be governor should that be required from day one.
But what do they do? I mean, they do stuff.
Well, we've seen different relationships over the years. You know, you saw a real partnership with Lawton Chiles and Buddy McKay. You saw Frank Brogan, who was Jeb Bush's lead education advocate and a major